Tantor Audio presents The Price of Valor, the life of Audie Murphy, America's most decorated hero of World War II, by David A. Smith, narrated by Tom Perkins. Introduction. His grave is marked by a standard Arlington Cemetery tombstone of white marble, just like the hundreds of thousands of others. It stands at the end of a row, shaded by the branches of a massive willow oak tree, beside the road that passes north of the amphitheater, near the Tomb of the Unknowns. Groundskeepers built a flagstone walkway around the tree to accommodate the steady trickle of visitors. Each day, small groups of people drift over, some of them clutching a map from the visitor center, obviously searching for the grave. They pause, and a few take off their hats. They speak to each other in hushed tones. Some obviously know more about the record of achievement that is abbreviated on the front of the stone than do others. "The Medal of Honor," one man says softly to his companion. "They don't just give those away." Seen from afar among the orderly ranks and files of headstones, this one is indistinguishable from all the others. Approaching closer, one may notice a small American flag pushed into the soft ground beside it. Its story of honor and heroism is only hinted at by the letters inscribed on the gravestone. Audie L. Murphy occupies a distinct place in the roster of famous Americans. During his short, troubled life, he served as an American archetype in at least two ways. First and foremost, he was a soldier and decorated war hero, the most decorated American soldier of the Second World War. His actions in World War II were of the sort from which chroniclers, balladeers, and poets since the days of the ancient Greeks have composed legends. He was the man charging headlong into fortified enemy positions, holding his own against an onslaught of enemy soldiers, defying the odds, always brave, always valorous, always alone. Second, Audie Murphy was a movie star. He made nearly 50 movies in a career that spanned 23 years, 10 times as long as the war experience that made him famous, and during his peak of popularity received more fan mail than almost any other actor. The quality of the movies he made varied widely as he took on westerns, war movies, and serious contemporary scripts. Some directors with whom he worked coaxed stirring, praiseworthy performances from him that seemed to portend a hopeful career. In other films, critics would pointedly and acidulously note that he seemed lost, detached, or simply going through the motions, an actor distracted, a man unable to engage. Murphy was not alone in being a movie star who served in the war. Other leading men like Clark Gable and Jimmy Stewart did so, although neither was as decorated as Murphy himself would be. Unlike them, or, say, baseball player Ted Williams, Audie Murphy was not an established star celebrity who went off to war, but instead a poor boy from Texas who volunteered for the Army in 1942, a year before his 18th birthday. He endured some of the toughest sustained infantry combat in the European theater. Few people beyond his division had heard his name when he became the most decorated soldier of the war and was suddenly hailed as a hero. In the summer of 1945, his face, impossibly young and fresh, appeared on the cover of Life magazine. Life at the time was the supreme arbiter of all things American, the herald and billboard of the American century, and to appear on its cover was to embody all that the country wanted to think of itself. More than anyone else, Murphy became the very incarnation of the average American who went to war, performed valorous and selfless deeds, and then came home to resume his life. Except that in Murphy's case, he did not return to the poor small town, rural Texas that he knew, but to a life in Hollywood and of celebrity. War makes strange giant creatures out of us little routine men who inhabit the earth. said journalist Ernie Pyle, who reported the news from the Italian front while Audie Murphy was fighting there. When the war was done, Murphy was a national hero, and to his embarrassment and obvious ill-ease, he was treated like a dignitary, given parades, and made to give speeches. Hardly before the shock of being home had worn off, he found himself summoned to Hollywood by one of the biggest stars in the movie business. There were, of course, other Congressional Medal of Honor winners and many other heroes in the war, but few became permanent celebrities, let alone of the Hollywood sort. And in Audie Murphy, the tension between the real-life heroism he performed on the battlefield and the celebrity that was awarded him afterward was almost always evident. Jack Valenti, a fellow Texan and veteran, journalist, and longtime president of the Motion Picture Association of America, wrote that the important fact, the significance of Audie Murphy's valor is that he was a simple, ordinary youngster, with no indications or outcroppings to show the stern courage within him that was shortly to burn as bright as the glint of the sun. Indeed, one of the complexities of Audie Murphy's story is that he did seem on the surface so thoroughly simple and ordinary. It was a central ingredient, even, of his cultural image. What made him so appealing, however, was not his being average, but rather his being emblematic, the ideal of everyday American virtue, an embodiment of Norman Rockwell America. He was how the country wanted to think of itself. Yet lurking below the Norman Rockwell-like image of Audie Murphy was what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, from which he so clearly and devastatingly suffered. During World War II, it was called battle fatigue, and in the war before that, shell shock. Whatever the label, it plagued him for the rest of his life after the war. It was a condition which at the time was little understood, and for the treatment of which there was almost no help available. He was aware of how it affected him, and sometimes gave way to bitterness about it. Killing, psychologists say, is the single most pervasive traumatic experience of war. Second to this is the emotional distress experienced by observing violence and the death of friends and comrades. Murphy had done more than his fair share of killing and seeing others killed. Despite an appealingly fresh-faced and youthful appearance that stayed with him well into his adult years, his wartime trauma left him scarred. There was always a profound melancholy just under his surface, along with a fatalism that was completely at odds with his image. The tension made him an interesting actor, but it came at a high cost. "Before the war, I'd get excited and enthused about a lot of things," he once admitted to film director John Huston, "but not anymore." Murphy often appeared withdrawn and depressed, unable to focus too long on any one task. Overwhelmed by pessimism, he was subject to hair-raising bouts of temper. He was tormented by nightmares. Within a week of flying home, he was reliving the war in his dreams. He would wake up yelling for his buddies who had died in his arms. He slept with the light on, and then resorted to sleeping pills. Military historian Max Hastings described Audie Murphy as a psychological mess of epic proportions. Some of Murphy's torments also had their roots in his childhood, which was marked by profound insecurities. Murphy came of age during the Great Depression, and the uncertainty of those years left their mark on him. In his acclaimed book, The Greatest Generation, journalist Tom Brokaw noted that children like Audie Murphy watched their parents lose their businesses, their farms, their jobs, their hopes. They had learned to accept a future that played out one day at a time. Murphy never looked far into the future. The present was always enough of a challenge. His father's periodic absences and the strain they put on his mother also affected him deeply. He was both fiercely proud and remarkably withdrawn. Even when he was a young boy, adults who knew him sensed his pride, his sensitivity, and his anger. But it was Murphy's war trauma that shaped his adult life more than anything else, and his responses to the distinctive stresses of war are not unique. A friend of mine who teaches at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College once told me that there were certain clips from movies he refused to show to any of his classes in which there were veterans. The images, and even more the sounds of combat, he said, could trigger terrible and unpredictable reactions. Given this, the more one knows about Audie Murphy's story, the more difficult it is to watch To Hell and Back, the 1955 film version of his life based on his memoir, in which he starred as himself. Not only was a fragile and lonely soul made to relive the pain of his mother's death, but amid Hollywood choreographed explosions and gunfire he was made to relive the deaths of his closest companions as well. In the 1959 movie No Name on the Bullet, a psychological drama in the form of a Western, Murphy plays a hired killer named John Gant, who has grown numb from his line of work and speaks of death with cold detachment. In this movie, as in so many others he made, Murphy's character is low-key, a man of few words, a distant look in his eyes, a man who has been drained by his experiences. "I can't make my mind accept that Gant is the vicious killer I know him to be," says the town doctor at one point. "I've played chess with him. I've talked with him. I found myself liking him." Similarly, it might be hard to recognize not only the war hero, but the tormented veteran in the small, quiet young man who stepped off the Army transport plane returning home to instant fame. "A man can't escape his past," another character remarks of John Gant. That certainly became true for Audie Murphy. The tree that shades Murphy's tombstone in Arlington Cemetery, and on hot summer days provides a welcome relief to those who come to find his final resting place and pay their respects, also hints at the shadow the war cast over his life. His story is one of triumph, trauma, and ultimately tragedy. He was a man who, without ever intending to be, had to live out his life as the most decorated soldier of World War II, and one of the most celebrated heroes in American history. Chapter 1. A Child of the Depression. Shadows from the tree lines were just beginning to stretch out across the dry, dusty cotton fields on the evening of June 20th, 1925, when the telephone rang. As one of the few physicians in northern Hunt County, Texas, a rural area 50 miles northeast of Dallas, Doc Pearson was accustomed to his phone ringing at all hours. This time it was interrupting his dinner. On the other end of the line was Emmett Murphy, a poor tenant farmer calling from the home of the man on whose land he was currently working. His wife was going into labor and needed the doctor to come at once. It didn't take long for the doctor to drive the bumpy white gravel roads that snaked around and through the fields to the Murphys' small 4-room clapboard cabin. When he arrived, he found 2 women neighbors attending to Josie Murphy inside. Emmett and the Murphys' 3 children waited anxiously outside in the front yard. The Murphys knew how fragile life could be. In 1919, their 10-month-old daughter, Virginia Onetta, had died. In 1920, their 4-year-old son Vernon had died of pneumonia, a complication from influenza. And that same year, a son they had planned to name J.W. was stillborn. At about 7 p.m., the doctor stepped onto the porch and congratulated Murphy on the birth of an apparently healthy son. Previously, the Murphys had made a habit of naming their children prior to birth, but by the time their 7th arrived, they were perhaps wary. Eventually, the family settled on the first name of Audie, after one of their neighbors whose wife had helped Josie during her pregnancy. The baby's oldest sister, Corinne, suggested Leon as a middle name. It was a far cry from the grand names of Audie's paternal and maternal grandparents, George Washington Murphy and Jefferson Davis Killian. The fanciful image of the Roaring Twenties had very little to do with the reality of life in rural Hunt County, Texas. Here in the Blackland Prairie, cotton was still king, and there were just enough creeks and shade trees to provide cover for deer, rabbits, and squirrels. The entire population of the county was a little more than 50,000 people, about one-third the size of Dallas in 1925. Greenville, the county seat, had the largest cottonseed oil mill in the South, and there was big money to be made in the business, but for the families who tilled the fields, there was very little money in cotton. Fewer than 1 in 3 owned the land on which they worked, and those that didn't regularly drifted from farm to farm. Emmett Murphy was one of those, always on the move, moving from the Bowles farm near Kingston, where Audie was born, to farms near the smaller communities of Hogeye, White Rock, and Lane. From the time he could walk and pull weeds, Audie worked in the fields alongside his father, mother, and older siblings. Sometimes an uncle or two, usually Josie's brothers Charles and William Killian, whom Audie especially liked, would join them in the cotton fields. Audie had 5 uncles who had served in World War I, including Charles and William, and one who came back from the war with a permanent hacking cough from being exposed to poison gas. Audie grew up hearing stories of the Great War and of what it was like to be a soldier. To him, combat sounded like a tremendous adventure, far removed from the drudgery of the cotton fields. In his daydreams, the hoe became his weapon, weeds were the enemy soldiers, and army life seemed a great alternative to living off the land. As a child, Audie was particularly close to his sister Corinne, who was 14 years his senior, and who took a large role in raising him. She put him to bed each night, singing and rocking him to sleep. Despite the family's deprivations, Corinne remembered him as a happy child, who laughed a great deal, and when he laughed, his eyes just sparkled. Like many boys, Audie liked dogs, and they liked him. When he was about 3 years old, some neighbors gave him a dog named Wheeler, and the two became inseparable. But then came the first of many sudden shocks to his world. His sister Corinne left home when he was 5, and moved to the small town of Farmersville to live with her grandparents. The run-down houses in which Audie grew up had no plumbing or electricity. Josie did the cooking on a wood-burning stove, and heat came from a fireplace, if there was one. The family got its milk from one cow that traveled with them from place to place. The thin walls of their homes barely kept out the weather, and Audie would always remember the wail of wind around a shanty. In 1933, the family was evicted from their house in Lane for non-payment of rent. Poverty, Audie wrote, dogged our every step. The Great Depression hit regions like Hunt County particularly hard. Cotton prices were always volatile, but after the great stock market crash in late October 1929, cotton prices took a harrowing plunge. By July 1931, they had fallen from 16 cents to 10 cents a pound. In September, cotton went for a little more than 6 cents a pound, and at the beginning of October, it hit the unprecedented low of just 4.7 cents per pound. At that price, a 500-pound bale of cotton, which represented 200 man-hours of work, would bring only $23.50. One field hand, in circumstances not unlike Emmett Murphy's, said he had made a mere 91 cents from an entire week's worth of hard work. "I can starve just as easily sitting down as I can picking cotton," he said sadly. In July 1932, most small-town newspapers stopped printing the daily cotton price. It was just too depressing. In September 1931, a special session of the Texas legislature passed a bill intending to prop up cotton prices by strictly limiting the number of acres farmers could plant in the following year. Even though the Texas Supreme Court voided the law in 1932, many landowners stopped planting on their own initiative because of the low prices. In November 1933, the U.S. Congress passed a law regulating cotton production by means of gin quotas. Consequently, with fewer acres under cultivation, it became harder for families like the Murphys to find work. After they left the community of Lane, the Murphys moved to the small town of Celeste, living for a few months in a converted boxcar before moving into a rental house, little more than a shack, on the east edge of town, 2 blocks off the main street. The rent was $4 a month, and here the family at least had electricity, a bare bulb hanging from a cord in each room, for the first time. And for the first time they actually had next-door neighbors. John Cawthon was a barber in town, and he and his wife Willie became close friends of the Murphys. Audie's sister Willie, born in 1933, was named after Mrs. Cawthon. The Cawthons looked out for the Murphy children and helped take care of them. Soon Audie was at their house more often than at his own. On the weekends Mr. Cawthon would sometimes give his boys money to go to Greenville and see a movie, and he always made sure to give Audie enough to go with them. Audie's favorite movies were westerns, and his favorite star was Gary Cooper. He was already developing a sense of responsibility for his younger brothers and sisters, and every time he went into town, he returned with candy for them. It was while living in Celeste that 9-year-old Audie began attending school. Even though he was at least 2 years older than most of the other boys in first grade, he was small in stature, and even as a boy, looked younger than his years. Despite his late start at education, he usually liked school and loved to read, and was a good student who made mostly A's and B's. He became particularly close with his second-grade teacher, and would often stay after class and help her clean the classroom. Some of his teachers would often share their lunches with him, since he rarely brought a lunch of his own. His teachers recognized Audie as sensitive, stubborn, and proud. Once in 3rd grade he skipped school for 2 days after being spanked for a transgression. Although he hated it, all his teachers in Celeste called him Little Pat, simply because he was of Irish descent and his father was called Pat. He also particularly hated Little Breeches, which he was called because while he grew, his one pair of overalls did not. Audie had an ungovernable temper to go along with his pride. At school I had fought a great deal, he admitted. Perhaps I was trying to level with my fists what I assumed fate had put above me. I was a mean kid, he said. His teachers thought better of him. Audie was intelligent, industrious, quick to anger, but very loyal and devoted to the ones he loved, one of his teachers said. It makes me sad to think how unhappy my fighting Irishman must have been during his lifetime, when he had such great potential to have a wonderful life. Audie grew up hunting, mostly as a way to secure meat for the dinner table. As a young boy, he could hit and kill a running rabbit with a rock. He quickly graduated from rocks to slingshots, then to a .22 rifle, and with each weapon he displayed remarkable aim against rabbits, squirrels, and birds, sometimes seeing targets no one else could spot. His hearing was just as sharp as his eyesight, and he could locate a squirrel in a tree just from the sound of a cracking twig. While he was tracking down a squirrel or a bird, completely focused in the moment, he was truly content. One relative later recalled that about the only fun he ever had was hunting. John Cawthon was an avid dove hunter, and because his own sons did not like to hunt, he took Audie with him. Once Audie disappeared over the crest of a hill, and Cawthon heard multiple blasts from a shotgun. He returned to find Audie surrounded by so many doves that they exceeded the state limit. His marksmanship may seem legendary, but there was an undeniable reason for him to be a good shot. "If I missed, we didn't eat," he said. He also knew that he couldn't afford enough bullets to be a bad shot. Audie's other ideas of fun were dangerous in the extreme. He and his friends shot beer bottles off of each other's heads and shot sticks and cigarettes out of their hands in what they called Hunt County Roulette. It was foolhardy, but a friend remembered that Audie had great courage and always accepted a challenge. Audie had supreme confidence in his ability to put a bullet precisely where he wanted it, and his trusting, willing friends must have shared that confidence. If shooting and hunting were things that Audie Murphy did well, providing for a family was something that his father Emmett Murphy did not do well at all. Audie denied that his father was lazy, but conceded that he had a genius for not considering the future. Some of Murphy's neighbors in Celeste were less generous, grousing that Emmett Murphy was a layabout. His house was filthy, his wife and children ill cared for. In fact, one of Audie's sisters, who worked as a domestic helper for another family, was required by her employer to take a bath before she started work. What was talked about less openly was that Irish Pat, as Emmett Murphy was known, drank heavily and sometimes spent the night sleeping off a hangover in the town jail. Nights spent in jail were not Pat's only disappearances from his family. Audie's father could abandon them for days or even weeks without warning. By the 1930s, Emmett Murphy's recurrent absences had left his family dependent on the charity of neighbors and, after 1933, the various direct relief programs of the New Deal. While they lived in Celeste, women from the Baptist and Methodist churches regularly came by the house, or the boxcar, to drop off food, clothes, and even medicine occasionally. "Every time my old man couldn't feed the kids he had," Audie said later in life with the perspective that only time could bring, "he got himself another one. I suppose I hated him," he admitted, "because I hate anyone who quits." He resolved that he would not be like his father. Audie Murphy was far closer to his mother. 35 when Audie was born, Josie Murphy had already given birth 6 times and lost 3 children. She was prematurely aged and in increasingly ill health. When she was healthy, she worked in the fields alongside her husband and children, and when Emmett was gone, she had to work even harder. One of Audie's first chores as a little boy was to massage her hands in the evenings after she worked in the fields all day. They were hands that also, amazingly, could play the piano, which she did at the Baptist church. It bonded them deeply together. Audie claimed his earliest memory was wanting to do something for her. "I still feel guilty that I never could." In 1937, after 4 years in Celeste, the family moved to work on a farm near the small town of Floyd, west of Greenville. Though he was now only 13, Audie stopped going to school and started working full-time at whatever jobs he could find. He was a hard worker in everything he did, from selling magazine subscriptions door to door, to working on other farms, to working for a building contractor in Farmersville who paid him full wages because he did a man's work. Though at the insistence of his mother he returned to school in Floyd for a year, finishing 5th grade, by 1939, when he was 15, he left home and school for good, going to work for a man named Haney Lee, who owned a nearby farm. Audie moved in with the Lee family as a hired hand, making $1.50 a day along with room and board. Like the Cawthons in Celeste, Haney Lee and his wife became something of surrogate parents for him. Mr. Lee taught him how to drive, and when he was not working in the fields, Audie did the dishes alongside Mrs. Lee and helped with the housework. All of Audie's early employers regarded him as a hard worker who, unlike his father, kept himself neat and clean. "He was a fanatic about cleanliness," Lee's wife remembered. In 1940, Audie took a job in Greenville at a combination gas station and grocery store owned by Mrs. Lee's brother, Snow Warren. He was now making $12 a week at a time when a farmhand could only make between $1 and $1.50 a day. Goldie Warren, Snow Warren's wife, said that Audie was neat as a pin when he showed up to work, and charmingly humble and shy. Like his teachers, she also saw his pride hidden just beneath the surface, and described him as a sad-type person. It is not hard to see the adult Audie Murphy in that description. Audie was ambitious, too, and working at a gas station was not how he envisioned his future. He approached Jake Bowen, who owned the local radio repair shop, and asked him for a job, thinking he could learn more skills and eventually make more money there. Bowen told him that the shop needed extra help, but he couldn't afford to hire anyone. Still, he invited Murphy to live with his family and learn the business. Audie accepted. Most people who knew Audie at this time called him by his middle name, Leon, and Bowen was among the many who liked Murphy. He saw him as an eager beaver worker and an all-American boy type. Not only did he work hard, he was clean and neat, never used bad language, did not drink, and, after one ill-fated experiment with a pipe, steered clear of tobacco as well. After a while, he moved into a garage apartment with Jake Bowen's cousin Bill, who kept the books for the radio shop. He went to see an occasional movie in Greenville and spent his spare time building model airplanes that he hung from the ceiling of his room. In 1940, Audie's father left home again, and this time he did not return. For a while after her husband disappeared,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?